welcome to everybody. Good morning. Hope everybody's well and sort of surviving lockdown 3.0. Firstly, I'd like to thank and welcome Ben to this Zoom event. Really appreciate it, especially with I say busy news agenda, but an extra busy news agenda with an inauguration tonight. So I appreciate your time today, Ben. Thanks so much. And really, today is about getting a great insight into Sky News, a rolling news station, and at a time when the news is changing moment by moment. How do brands facilitate the news agenda? How can they be part of the conversation? And where is there opportunity for that light, alongside the, I'd say, shade, but even darkness of the hard news agenda? Well, hopefully, Ben will be able to answer some of these questions and many more. I'm going to pass you over to Sarah, who's going to be taking care of business today. Do get your questions in, and there's a little poll at the end as well that we'd appreciate you to stick around for 20 seconds. Over to you, Sarah and Ben.
Thanks, Phil. Anyone who's been to our events before knows that we take questions via Twitter. So if you do have any questions as Ben and I are having a conversation, then please do tweet us at BroadcastRevo, hashtag join the broadcast revolution. Anybody who submits a question via this method will be automatically entered into our prize draw for our Broadcast for Good prize. What this is every quarter, anybody who's posed a question in this way will pick somebody at random, and they will win a campaign that they can redeem against a charity of their choice. So please do send questions in, and then hopefully by the time we get to sort of 15-20 minutes before the end, we'll take questions from everybody else. So first of all, good morning, Ben.
Good morning. How are you, Sarah?
Yes, not too bad, thank you. Not too bad. How are you?
Very good. And can I just apologise to everyone? So we had to rearrange the dates, but that was my fault, or Donald Trump's fault.
Not to worry. It's a sign of the times, really, isn't it? But yeah, not to worry at all. We're just glad that we could get a bit of time with you, Ben. So first of all, just for anybody, just to give everyone a bit of an introduction to sort of you and what you do, it'd be great if you can give us just a bit of an overview of your role, what programmes you sit across, and what you look after.
Okay, I sit across primarily the evening output on Sky News. That's from 7 till midnight with Dermot Monahan from 7 till 9 and Anna Jones or Anna Botting from 9 till 12. First of all, they are among our most watched output. I hesitate to use the word flagship. Any program I work on is the flagship outlet, but it's certainly the program we devote most of our energy to. And by the evening, we are changing from a rolling live latest channel to a more considered bulletin type with packages, what we call packages. Apologies, I try and always avoid as much jargon as I can, but reports curated, made by correspondents with guests. So something much more similar to terrestrial channels, if you like, albeit over 5 hours. So a considered take on the day's news.
And for anyone who's sort of not familiar, how do the teams, sort of the newsroom operates at Sky? Is there much kind of overlap with the online teams? Do you have much overlap with other people who work across different programs? How does the kind of news output work?
Very good question, and I wish there were completely clear answers to it. The digital team is effectively separate. So certainly, in a way, the higher up you get in my position, the more separate you are. Where there is overlap, television news or video news or broadcast news, which what they could call ourselves, divides into two halves of a newsroom. There's what they call intake, and they're the people who go out and get all the information. So reporters, if you like, cameramen, trucks, satellite, all the technical gubbins, but the news gatherers is the technical phrase. And those news gatherers work to all platforms. So in that respect, a correspondent who is in Rotherham at a vaccine centre is working for everything Sky does, if you like, television, podcasts, online, social, on demand, yada, 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 yada. Then the output teams are divided. So I work on the evening news. I don't have much contact or input on the digital output. That would be a different team. That said, we're supposed to be consistent across all our platforms. And that, as you can imagine, leads to some interesting conversations and tensions as the day unfolds.
And what are some of the sort of biggest changes that Sky have had to make, as many businesses have had to make sort of over the last 12 months? And what are some of the recent changes that we've seen to kind of programming?
So I was thinking about this beforehand, and I was trying to think of a comparable that some of your clients might be working in, but news without COVID is already undergoing revolution after revolution after revolution with the internet, et cetera, et cetera. So I wondered if it was similar to retail or something like that, a business that is just changing so fast. New providers popping up all the time. New ways of communicating information to audiences. The big surge of the moment is podcasting, for example. Maybe at Sky News we've been slightly behind on that one, but we're putting a huge thrust into that at the moment. So there's already a revolution going on, and then along comes a pandemic, and I think most of a lot of the changes there around that have been the same that everybody's had to go to. How do you organize a newsroom working from home? I would say it's particularly hard in a newsroom because it's such a fast business where daily communication, communication second by second is absolutely essential. So that's been an enormous challenge. And I should say the government's been very supportive because we are key workers. So some of us are allowed into work, whatever the latest rules are. So I actually have been going into work all the time since the beginning. And then in terms of how we do stuff, the proliferation of Zoom is the huge change. And I think talking to your clients, I think it's fascinating how that's changed the game. And I think it has made us. It's made it easier to get people on air, because we used to be very fussy about getting people what we call in quality, and I was very, very fussy about it. I thought as an international news channel, I was very hostile to Skypes and stuff appearing on the air. Now it's the new normal. One of the $1 million questions in the industry is when this is all over, will we go back to it, or have our sort of prejudices been dropped, particularly as the technology gets better and better? I suspect it's more the latter, but I've no idea.
I was going to say, because that was going to be a question I was going to throw in very quickly, is do you think it'll be here to stay? Do you think you'll be, because obviously you don't want to have your whole program as a series of the same sort of Zoom interviews, because I imagine that does get quite kind of tedious for the viewer watching it. So there's ways in which you probably have had to be quite creative to kind of keep that attention, so it isn't just the same people.
Certainly my view was pre-pandemic we couldn't be like a YouTube channel. We had to be a more polished product. I there will be more Zoom, I'm sure, going forward. There will be more of it, but where the snapback is, I don't know. I mean, we do a lot of sort of live audience. We've done live audience programs now with all the audience are obviously all on Zoom. Will that continue?
Yeah.
These are all things. Let's look at the advantages. It is much better to get a more diverse audience from across the country than if you're insisting everybody comes to London.
Sure.
Obviously, it is much easier to get guests from around the country than it was. It's much harder to generate polished content from around the country than it was. That's mainly because of social distancing and so on. So, for example, we can't go and film in someone's house at the moment. It's very, very difficult. And if any of your clients are trying to do a story that involves household appliances or something within the home, that is very, very hard to do.
And we'll come on to COVID just as a topic in a minute, but just as a final thing, just as a overview of Sky News, is who are your audience, or do you have different audiences depending on the times of day? And I suppose the second part to that question is, how do you try to differ to the likes of BBC, ITV, whether that's through the reporting style, the topics you cover? How do you try to establish that point of difference as a channel?
I think the Sky will always have the USP of speed and the latest. So we pride ourselves on being the quickest news channel out there. We continuously win awards for doing that, and being the first anywhere. So that's one point of difference. But we're also now throwing enormous effort, and that's what makes Sky an incredibly exciting channel to work on, is we both have to be the quickest, but also the most considered. My boss, John Riley, has a phrase, breaking news is necessary, but not sufficient. So we have to be the best at breaking news, and we are. We've also got to be the best at everything else. So that's the enormous challenge facing Sky News, and which makes it very thrilling place to work. So at the evening end where I work, my work is probably the most similar to somebody at another channel, say, compared to the daytime, which is much more rolling, much more latest. But Sky, we do breaking news, we do evening bulletin news, we have a flagship political program, Ridge on Sunday, we have a daily business program, Here King Live. It's almost important, remember, to think that Sky is a channel, a bit like BBC One, but it's a news channel. All our content is news, and we do everything.
And given that the setup of your programme is slightly different, as you were saying, to sort of earlier in the day, where it has more of that kind of rolling news feel to it, does that take more forward planning, or are you still just sort of putting together the programme on the day before?
There's always all news is a tension between the forward planners and then me, who turns up in the morning and likes to rip it all up. So I'm the person when you feel let down by a broadcasting organisation, it's normally my fault. But I don't think it's a particular feature of Sky. Television news needs a lot of planning. It's a military operation. So again, if your focus is television outlets, get to know the planners, get into the plan, work out how the planning operation is, get to people in advance. You know, if any of you think you're bringing up today Sky News and saying, oh, would you mention one of our clients appearing on the program today on the day of the Trump inauguration, it ain't going to happen. So, I mean, there's two things. There's planning, and then be very, very aware of the news agenda. So I do sometimes, the amount of time I think that is wasted pitching stuff on days when I stop the conversation, say it's just not going to happen because it's the budget or it's the inauguration. You know, there'll be wall-to-wall coverage on Joe Biden becoming president this evening. So any of your clients have launched a campaign for the start this evening, you know, it's not going to have a very auspicious start. So advanced knowledge, get to know the planners, and be very aware of the news agenda. I think the other thing that I come from the television news side. Mobile is more mobile. That's for another reason. That is a more agile. Anything written is easier to turn around fast. So the planning build up is probably less for that.
Because I know we spoke about sort of earlier in the week when we had a brief chat about the challenge for organisations at the moment with the nature of the news agenda. Just coming on to COVID, really, because we obviously can't avoid it. But obviously, it kind of feels like we're going around in circles to some extent of going into these lockdowns, coming out of lockdowns, and there's an element, and I suppose this is the challenge, on how to report it as it is, but also to report it differently to other news channels. And you know, and I suppose how has Sky, do you think, tried to report this lockdown differently, whether that's through sort of highlighting different businesses that have been impacted, or anything like that? How do you try to show that point of difference to make sure your viewers aren't just kind of switching off because it just feels like they're just watching the same thing over and over again?
Well, I think I've never worked on a story, and it's hard to work out where the interest hasn't dropped off. I think as professional, we all say we're bored of COVID. People are largely because I think it's news you can use, and we're also affected by it. People are still tuning in huge numbers. So I think a bit compared to other running stories I've done, say sort of the financial crisis or wars, etc. Brexit, remember that, where a lot more effort had to go into it, conning the viewer into, if you like, into thinking you're doing something new. I think COVID is just of a different magnitude because, you know, my mum's waiting for a second jab. She rings you up every day saying what's going on, as if I'm work for the NHS, and but there is that huge interest in it. So I think as professionals, we're probably all more tired than audiences are. And that's something we have to remind ourselves every day of, reporting the facts. What's the latest? I think people are still every day tuning in to find out how many people have died and how many people have been vaccinated. So it's keeping professional on that front. I think there's a big push that Sky and other organisations made is into data journalism and data, and I think COVID will be a landmark in putting numbers into news, and that's another thing that I've been interested in post-COVID. So our economics editor, Jake Conway, is now our economics and data editor, and here across platforms has been doing some incredible analysis with Roland Manthorpe, our technology correspondent, of the millions of different numbers that have come out about COVID, and I think that's something that will that will definitely continue. There is a thirst for data analysis that didn't, you know, if you'd asked me 10 years ago about data analysis, you'd have laughed.
No, that's quite interesting, because I know you've mentioned there obviously about Brexit as well, the other sort of big beast story that we've seen as well alongside COVID. I suppose my question is, aside from sort of, I mean, everything is sort of under the umbrella of COVID and Brexit to some extent, but are there any other sort of key issues and events that you'll be focused on in the next few months, or you'll be planning for, or you think are going to come sort of back into the sort of agenda of being quite important to focus on this year?
Wow. I mean, there's one name we haven't mentioned anyway. Just say, I mean, the news is we were beginning to think a lot like that. I mean, it's very, you know, the lockdown only happened on January the 4th. Have I got the date right? It was my first day back from work after a week. And I was hoping for a nice quiet day and, you know, a day without eating turkey. Yeah. So, I mean, 3 weeks ago, we were all planning Christmases and stuff like that. So it's moving so fast. So I think a lot of the thoughts are part. I think the green agenda would be the big one that Sky, and we're keeping at it. But the green agenda is something Sky, both as a news organisation and a company. I mean, we were very proud of our Sky Ocean Rescue coverage, which focused on plastic in the ocean. But climate change, you know, is it? It's I can't remember the name. COP one. Have I got the name right? Somebody help me. The big conference in Edinburgh in June, I think. Yeah, COP26. Thank you, Beth. So that, I mean, and that Biden will be coming to America. So I would say that's a sort of non-COVID issue that will return. I think the big post-COVID issue will be the economy and business. So again, I mean, I think that will that's I might be completely wrong, but I individually and it's going to be a long road out, isn't it? And that's going to be where a lot of the political energy is around. Sure. In the coming months.
And so obviously Sky have had sort of within this last year, their sort of your questions, you know, they've had a Q&A sections across the news channel. to answer anything, with COVID, as you were talking about earlier, about the need, people needing the factual information. Do you foresee, as we kind of come out of COVID and sort of, we'll focus on other issues such as climate change, that kind of importance of Q&A, that kind of setup of information and factual sharing that has kind of been born out of COVID will be set to continue? And I suppose the reason I'm asking is do you think then there's more opportunities here for brands and organisations to put forward their experts for those kind of opportunities across the news agenda, where they might be previously have been focusing quite a lot on proactive campaigns?
Yes, I think so. I think the Q&A, it's funny how the world changes, the world stays the same. But the Q&A is the oldest broadcasting format of them all. It's a phone-in, if you like. And phone-ins do people still listen to local radio? Phone-ins are been the staple of broadcast journalism since the beginning. Yes, I think there will, but never underestimate news is fickle. And we're victims of fashion. So I could easily see in 6 months, right, no more Q&As, had enough. And then in January, I'll ring you up and say, right, we want to do a Q&A. So, but I think, it taps into that data point. And it taps into this, where social media has been of people not necessarily just satisfied to get information via a correspondent telling them what to think, but wanting more control. To be quite. I was thinking the other day of how should we looking at some of the chat services available now as a consumer on when you with your bank and so on and stuff like that. This is just me musing out loud. Is that something news or information provision should be looking at as well? That you can. The Sky News chatbot. Sorry, this is a mad thing I've been thinking about on the show. So I don't please everyone listen to this. But
good feedback.
I think I think you're onto something, and I think in all crises you're trying to assess what's the change, what will stay the same, and what will change. I think there's a lot of chat about Zoom and working from home. And I wonder if somebody's like that's the slight red herring that it's data and information to the public. And then we might be flipping out of the sort of fake news post Donald Trump world. There may be a new hunger for facts. Dare I use that word? Am I allowed to say that again soon? But that's I can see that being a new tone to coverage and the news production. In the
it seems like from what you're saying, sort of businesses who have access, is that something that's useful for you then possibly in the future, is businesses that have access to actually some really rich data or any insights, and actually sharing that could be a way in which we move forward of working closely with broadcasters such as Sky News. I think that's quite interesting. Yeah.
I think I know I've spoken to some companies about this. It'd be very, I don't know how many of your companies are in pharma and health. That's the other. Will we come out of this obsessed with life sciences? Talking about clinical trials. Will all our children want to become vaccinologists, research scientists? There's a lot of excitement around that area in the industry now. People know what a clinical trial is. The vaccine debate, that whole area, provision of healthcare, care homes. I think I would be astonished if there isn't some effort at a new settlement for elderly, the way we look after the elderly in the wake of this. That said, we've been saying that for 10 years, but I think that's going to be. But yes, I think I think campaigns that can provide new information and data would be very valuable.
And sort of at a time, sort of over the last year, when we've seen kind of across, not just I suppose Sky, but all broadcasters, a need for experts, commentators to help unpack the kind of any kind of announcement or any kind of changes we've seen. I suppose my question is, are there any sort of particular experts that Sky is always looking for or keen to hear from, or struggles to get sort of to comment on, whether that's about the economy or the latest, COVID announcement? Are there any experts that you think would be really useful to offer?
I think there are plenty of experts out there that if I'm honest, at Sky, I'm never short of talking heads. It's nearly always about something different from that. It's added to that. That's another thing. I was just an email saying so and so is available to comment on a running story. Unless something really springs out about that person, especially on a national news channel, we can get top. We've got Patrick Vallance sitting, and he's just left. We've got Patrick Vallance sitting in the morning. Doing a Q&A this morning. So Sky News, the bar is pretty high for getting, if we want good experts, we can get good experts. I think it has to be something more to really, the story or the information you're bringing has to stand out, not just this is a person who knows a lot about Pfizer.
Sure. And as we were talking sort of about Brexit, COVID, climate change, are there any sort of organisations or businesses you're particularly interested in hearing from over the next few months that you think maybe haven't had that sort of airtime to show the impact on the industry, or in whatever reason? Are there any that you're particularly keen to sort of hear from?
I think news always says it. We're always very proud of saying we want to get beneath the headlines and stuff like that. But we will. Most of our business coverage, I suspect, will be on the areas that have been most affected by. I think there'll be a lot of retail and hospitality coverage. A lot of hospitality coverage in the coming months. The great reopening, there will be in whenever that is, but there will be a lot of coverage around that. I think again, in the last time I worked with you guys was in Manchester. The levelling up agenda, and the media takes its cue from the agenda. So you work in the media as well, the different parts of it. But there's always this myth of someone like me sitting in my Osterley Tower, deciding, right, this year this is what we're going to cover.
Sure.
If Boris Johnson keeps talking about levelling up and reviving the regions and spending money in the Northern Wall, we will cover that a lot. If he doesn't, we'll probably cover it, but he doesn't do it a lot. But I suspect that's. I suspect there'll be a lot of demand for evidence of the reviving of the northern economy, if you like. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. But there's a lot of interest in towns. There's a lot of political interest, not in cities, where I don't know how many of our audience live in towns as opposed to cities. There's a lot of interest in that politically, because that's where all the marginal seats are, and that will drive a lot of our coverage. The other story we haven't mentioned today is Scotland, and that will be if those elections happen. That will be another big driver.
And do you think there's still an appetite at Sky, or is there an appetite at Sky for, I'd say, light relief stories, sort of where appropriate?
Yes.
Is there still that need? Is that still something that's very much important to the programming?
Yes, it is. I think at Sky we tend to, you asked about who watches it. Our view at Sky is most people who watch us are interested in the news in the first place. I don't think we have as many casual viewers, if you like, as on other stuff. So there's less of a culture of "and finally," as we call it, than there is at other organisations. That said, it is very important to provide that. And actually, let's face it, the vaccine story has provided relief, if you like, in some of the stories. Just the wonderful stories of Ian McKellen getting a vaccine, and a 75-year-old from Gloucester, crying when she gets the jab. But yes, there is that you're always looking for variety and something that's not utterly miserable. It doesn't have to be funny, ha ha. Pictures is a big part of that. If you can write a great video opportunity or a great case study,
a
great talker, with an amazing individual. The great example last year was Captain Tom or Major Tom. So one's David Bowie and one's who's the guy who walked. Come on, guys. Captain Tom. Thank you. Yeah, Major Tom is. I'm revealing my age. Captain Tom. That's not a funny story. I mean, that's Endeavour is always something people are very interested in. So I mean, the wonderful stories around the rugby league player who's got motor neuron disease and the guy his mate is running. So endurance, heroic achievement, and we've done quite a lot. We did do a Healthcare Heroes series, about people, the key workers working on the front line. So I think yes, but it doesn't have to be rip-roaringly hilarious. It can just be. It can be something that lifts the spirit. Yeah, inspires.
It's interesting, actually. You mentioned another health charity, because we do actually have quite a few sort of health brands tuning in today, and some of the questions we had in is there still sort of appetite for growing? I mean, it's tricky when you're up against a big health story that isn't going away, that is COVID, but is there still appetite, you think, for other health stories and awareness campaigns?
There's always appetite. I think it's hard, but I mean, you're right. That is the real NHS story, not COVID, but all the other things we're not doing at the moment. Sorry, there's a NutriBit now going off in the corner, so apologies.
Don't worry. The joys of working from home.
So I think there is, but I think it's hard. It's quite hard. So you've just reported 2 stories about COVID to then say, but we mustn't forget breast cancer, and then to do a piece about the tragedy that affects on people's lives. So I think it is really hard. And that's not to say we're right not to do more in it, but I think that's that space. I'm sorry not to encourage you more, but that space is going to be difficult, and it's probably. I'd encourage you as a citizen as well as a professional to keep plugging away, because I suspect it's very, very important. I'm a trustee of a prostate cancer charity. It's going to be a big deal, but it is hard. It is hard.
And we kind of touched on planning very briefly earlier, but whenever we've done these sort of events pre-COVID, media would always say sort of get in touch a couple of weeks in advance if you've got a good story to get it on the radar. Is that sort of a 2-part question? Is that still the case? Is it still really good to kind of give it that time for forward planning? And are you still interested, or are you interested in working with, specifically charities or organisations on exclusive sort of investigative pieces as well?
Yes, of course. I think I'm not going to pick a time slot, but I think, yes, the more you can get in advance and also know the best way in. So if you're a business, I think your first point of call at Sky News should be the business desk stroke Ian King Live. That just makes sense. If you're with a story that have a particular appeal to a breakfast audience, don't ring me first, ring the breakfast team first. So I think it's not just planning, but it's focus on the best way in. If it's a data story, find out who our data people are. And there is a growing data team on the digital front, which is building. I don't know a great deal about, but I'm not sure how good we are. Be wary of generic email addresses. I don't know how that makes it, but, home. I don't know. I'm sure we've got home planning at sky.com. I'm not slandering my colleagues, but I wonder how many of those emails actually make it through. It's that personal contact, get to know people. I mean, that's why I enjoy doing things like this, because I get stories out of it and get to meet people, and relationships are established. I think that's just is so valuable.
Yeah, we've had quite a few questions from the audience now. So just for the last sort of 15, 20 minutes, I'm just going to rattle through some of the ones that we've had in. Please do keep tweeting if you have any additional questions that you want us to put to Ben. So first question we've had, Ben, Rachel at Royal Mint asks, what tick list a PR could put together to provide the best possible package of content for you and your team? So what are the key consideration points?
What the story is. So the absolutely, what are you selling? I mean, you mentioned earlier about analysis, an email saying we've got someone who can give analysis on COVID. That's not going to catch any attention. A Royal Mint email that says there's a new coin which cures COVID. I'm being facetious, but the more focus the story has, the better. So I think that's important. And then as well as voices, filming opportunities. Filming opportunities. I mean, so much of it is on the COVID front. A lot of it is driven by when you're allowed into a hospital or not. You can't put for television organisation. It's pictures. So those are the two things I'd say. Is that helpful? No, you haven't got time to reply. Yeah, okay. You can all have my details afterwards and then tell me where I was wrong.
So George at World Animal Protections said, I can see Sky is sponsoring COP26. Does this mean Sky News will be open to more pictures around issues, for example, on intensive animal farming and wildlife trade and the effect on our environment and biodiversity?
Absolutely. I mean, Sky is a global news organisation with a lot of muscle around the world. So, I mean, another thing I mentioned, I don't know if any of you know any of our foreign correspondents. If you're speaking just intensive farming in the UK, but all those agricultural practices, I'm sure there will be a lot of international coverage of environmental issues in the build-up to COP26. So my main tip there is don't just be in touch with our climate change correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, but we've got bureaus in Joburg, we've got bureaus in Brussels, we've got bureaus in Moscow, we've got bureaus in LA, New York, Hong Kong, China, Bangkok, Delhi. All these are ways into Sky News. The more I'm thinking about it, the really interesting, the climate change is going to be, their inbox is going to be bulging this year. So I think you've got to be quite smart in how you get through.
Kyle at The Big Partnership asks, how far in advance do you start planning non-breaking stories?
I'm not a planner, so I'm slightly busking it here. But it depends on the story. So this thing, so COP26, I imagine there's in a non-COVID world, I imagine there would be some meetings about it. There would certainly be some budget meetings about it now. Anything involved presentation, stuff like one of the big stories of the year. If it's a political election, I mean, that'd be years. But so how long is a piece of string? But I think you 2, 3, 4 weeks you want to be talking to people. But again, I think it's more about just build that relationship. And if that conversation doesn't work out the first time, just say, can we have a chat afterwards and just tell you about some other things we're working on in the next 6 months, and suddenly they'll go, oh, right, that's interesting. Didn't know about that.
And the second question from Carl, how likely are you to film in northeast of Scotland, or do you prefer to be sent footage?
Northeast Scotland. Yeah, I mean, it's a serious point of cameras sort of about logistics. So filming opportunities in northeast Scotland can be problematic, and again, it needs some planning. Filmed footage, again, is part of the road. We're using it a lot more because of COVID. I don't know what will happen post-COVID and whether we'll slip back to being less keen to use it. There are some regulatory issues around filmed, non-filmed footage that we have policies and protocols on that. So, and I don't want to say much more because I can't remember all of them.
You have to list all the policies now, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. But so that's worth being aware of, that we can't, we have to keep, and there's a difference between news coverage and VNRs, and if what we can and can't broadcast is worth you being across.
Sarah Havas asks, is there a focus on trying to cover more positive stories to alleviate the impact negative news has on people's mental health? Is this a focus at Sky News at all?
I think it's that's an interesting question. I wouldn't. I'm quite old-fashioned, but I never thought of it like that. That we have a responsibility towards people's mental, not to depress people. And that's really interesting, actually. I've never thought of it from that perspective. I mean, we've always thought we've got to provide some light and shade just to keep people watching. It's been a bit more mercenary than that. But I think that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that. And maybe we should. The problem, it's always the item that will get squeezed, if you see what I mean. Because... yeah. And I could just say, I mean, the other thing, on a lot of the colour and light, so there is an demand for it, is provided by sport and art and entertainment, and they don't quite exist as they do. But not all news is miserable. So the Olympics, everyone says but if the Olympics happen, and when we will do a month of joyful coverage of hopefully Britain winning loads of gold medals.
We've had one from an aspiring journo, Thomas, who's asked, how do you ensure the seamless transition between different newsreaders over the course of a 5-hour shift?
Seamless. Advertising breaks, Thomas.
That's the trick.
That's like smoke and mirrors. It's not difficult, but yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a flippant answer, but I mean, it's a rolling news channel. People are in and out. They have to be across. It's hard, but they have to be. They have to be across the news when they come in.
Sonia Edelman has asked, are there any trends you're seeing for this year that the Sky team are currently planning for? I mean, I know we've touched on sort of climate change, Brexit and COVID, but is there anything
trends?
Else in particular? Yeah.
God, I haven't had time to breathe this year. So, I've got to go away and read. I think, the rise of tech, I mean, the rise of tech, working from home, homeschooling, education. I mean, the post-COVID world is the trend. And I'm not clever enough to tell you what that is, if we knew what it was, but that is the trend.
Health PR Sonia asks, how do you handle an unexpected major breaking news story that may, for example, come up tonight during the planned coverage of Joe Biden?
Ignore it. No, that's a position. I mean, it has to, there are certain things, it would have to be enormous to stop you covering the inauguration of Joe Biden. It could happen. But I mean, that's news isn't fair like that. So when you get frustrated, and I'm sure you do, but news isn't. It's not a. It's very random many times. Great stories today will not get covered. Terrible stories tomorrow will get covered. And just remember, there's a lot of luck in it, in your pitches, as well as brilliant PR skill.
Bex from the British Red Cross asks, how much interest is there in how we sort of focusing on how we rebuild society?
I think there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest. And I'd have thought that 2 months ago, I'd have said that's what we'd be talking about now. But that intro, we just haven't got there yet. So. I mean, I hate that, the sort of feel reporting this story at the moment is it's all looking the vaccine's going around, it's all looking very hopeful. But, I'm just quoting the Prime Minister, there's not going to be an open sesame moment. And Chris Whitty has talked about certain restrictions still being put in place in September.
Yeah. And we've got one from Emily from Hill and Knowlton asks, what's the focus on this month's Digital World Economic Forum?
So what's the
focus on this month's Digital World Economic Forum?
Pass. Sorry. I will. It says the WF. Is it coming up?
I believe it's this month. So
yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I've done nothing but COVID and Donald Trump for 4 weeks. I'm guilty. Sorry. I don't think, that's a good question. What other stories have we done? Really hard, but I'm sure we have done.
Not very.
I'm not sure we've led on much other than Donald Trump or COVID for a month or so.
Gemma at RSPB asked, do celebrities still help with kind of getting cut through?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. That would be naive not to. I mean, but the story was that, is it today Ewan Blair has made, did everyone see it on the front page of the Times or something? He's made seven. He's not even a celebrity, but I mean, that got me reading about his company. I think links up apprenticeships or some kids with apprenticeships rather than universities. But I would never have been reading that article without Ewan Blair. So I think the big story is the Brexit story is all about the musicians, isn't it? But that's a classic PR, brilliant, well executed PR campaign. And if you can get Roger Daltrey and Sting and Elton John to sign the letter, absolutely.
Ellis at Pancom asks, should we wait to pitch a client for when their mission or their announcement matches with something in the news agenda?
Yes.
Yeah.
Equivocally don't. Again, be very, very aware of the news agenda. Yes. I think.
Juliet from Greater Anglia Rail asked, does Sky News have a transport correspondent?
We don't actually. No, we don't. No, we don't. This is why this is so good because it makes me think.
Yes, we're testing you really bad.
Yeah, no, not about the organisation, but no, we don't, and I'm not involved. I'm not involved in that side of the business, but we don't.
KG from Shelter asks, has the audience for the shows you look after, and I suppose Sky News TV in general, changed because of the pandemic? Have you seen shifts in the audience at all?
I haven't seen the data. It's just got much bigger. It's been a phenomenal, audiences for TV news, and that's been very heartening that that there is still there is the audiences for press conferences and so on have shown there is still an appetite for turning on the television to find out the latest. It's
interesting. So we spoke earlier about sort of the north of England, but Elaine at Morrison Media has asked, how do you sort of decide how to use regions and nations content? Do you try to have this 50-50 split every day?
There's no split, but we try, and probably always should try harder to tell stories from all over Britain. That's absolutely at the heart of what we have to do, and a lot of that is making sure that stories. So the important thing is not just to cover the north in quotes. It's when you're doing a story is to ask, why can't you tell that? Why does that have to be told from London? So a story about working from home, does or kids struggling with homeschooling, all the issues that affect us all should be told from all over the country. We don't have 50-50 split. It's something we do more and better of, but absolutely.
And actually, one thing we haven't spoken about is spokespeople, because obviously at the BBC they have their 50-50, drive to have representation across sort of men, women, but also spokespeople from ethnic minorities. Is there the same focus at Sky?
Yes. I mean, there are. I'm not going to speak to any targets or anything like that, but we keep a very close eye on representation and inclusion as a big driver of our coverage and our way of working.
Paige at Hotwire asks, is the travel industry going to be a business, if they've got a business in the travel industry, would you want to interview them when travel resumes?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge part of the economy. So, absolutely.
And any particular aspects of travel that you're most interested in?
Well, I think it would be economic. I think it's going to be. I suspect a lot of our coverage about travel and hospitality is going to be more at the hard end of dollars and dollars and pounds rather than features about what sort of holiday people do. It's the jobs. I mean, there's a big environmental issue around travel as well, which it'll be very interesting. How sort of how the travel industry markets itself at a time of COP26. That will be our staycation's here to stay. We'll see.
And I'm going to do our last couple of questions, and I think then we'll be out of time. But Becca at RAF Benevolent Fund asks, how does Sky resolve the tensions between the output teams in terms of news focus? Who takes precedence, TV or digital?
No, I'll have to. No. We are a platform neutral. Let's use the jargon. There is no preference. That's genuinely that's not chat. That is. And that's something for you to all bear in mind. Our digital output is as important as our TV output. It's absolutely 100% the case. So in terms of precedence, it doesn't work like that anymore. You have to. You can't answer a question saying, "Well, we're not going to do that, so we've got to do TV first." You then have to plan and organise so that you can serve both.
And one of our last questions, Alice at the NSPCC asks, how much do you sort of anticipate covering charity news stories over the coming months, particularly the impact on children and their mental health? We spoke about this actually in our last event, the sort of, as we kind of come out of COVID, the impact that it will have on everyone's mental health and what that kind of sort of hangover from COVID will look like. But do you foresee it being, particularly focused on children?
Well, I'm sure we'll do items on it. I'm not sure we're particularly focused. Everything you're telling me is interesting, and I think actually it's a really good window on my world of. I've just, we've had 10 questions there, all of which I'd love to cover. But I've also got to cover World War III, Donald Trump, Prince Harry going surfing, the Olympics, and that I think is really, in a way, that's like my inbox. What I've just had is 12 great stories that I'd love to cover. And it's almost sort of back to you guys. How do you make sure all those issues which we should cover and our audience would be interested, which one gets picked? And a lot of that is in the selling rather than me going to some sort of data computation of what's the most interesting versus audience versus everything like that is which press release catches the eye, who do I know?
Absolutely. And then our final question before we wrap up, which I suppose kind of links to what you were just saying, with the fast pace of the news agenda, what is the best way to pitch to certain desks? Is it still sort of individual email, news desk email, or is the phone call still quite useful?
I think all of them are fine, but it just the personal contact. Hearing from someone you have some sort of relationship is so much better than a cold call or a cold email. Do you see what I mean? It just
and I think that makes sense.